Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. lawmg.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. 3 Democrats are running for Bloomington mayor in the primary election. One of the main things they'll have to address is the controversial annexation plan, and they all have different ideas on the best path forward. A bill that would require teachers to notify parents if students request to be called by a different name, pronoun, or title that is inconsistent with their sex assigned at birth is advancing at the statehouse.
I believe it does not allow for human flourishing.
Ahead, the latest on what's been dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill and updates on other key pieces of legislation. Plus, not all worms are good for your soil.
Once you know you have them, do not ever let any soil leave your location.
The jumping worm is invading some Indiana gardens. What to do to prevent the pest and keep from spreading it. Those stories, plus the latest news headlines from across the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. After Bloomington Mayor John Hamilton announced late last year he would not seek a third term, 3 Democratic candidates entered the race and will be on the ballot in this May's primary. They held a joint forum this week, and Lucas Gonzalez has this report from it.
Bloomington mayoral candidates expressed similar priorities at a public forum Wednesday, but differed on a few key issues. The mayoral hopefuls, Don Griffin, Susan Sandberg, and Carrie Thompson, met at the Indiana Memorial Union to discuss their platforms. All 3 agreed on the need for affordable housing and collaboration between the city and county, but their opinions diverge on annexation. Mayor John Hamilton's plan to annex more than 8,000 acres of land has been controversial since it was first introduced in 2017. Griffin and Thomas say annexation is needed, but disagree on strategy.
We need a clear strategic plan in how we're going to provide city services to the people who will become city residents.
Griffin says he wants to stick to plans already in place.
And there are plans in place. There had to be plans in place to even to show that we could do it and that the city was capable. And that threshold has been passed already.
Sandberg called for a hard reset on the entire process. She was one of 3 city council members who opposed annexation initially. Sandberg says Hamilton's plan sought to do too much all at once and didn't involve county officials enough. She calls the process the beginning of a relationship breakdown between the city and county. The candidates all agreed that the community should be more involved in future annexation discussions. Annexation was just one of several issues the candidates hold different opinions on. Another concern is shortages in public safety, something Thompson says is a priority. The local firefighters union says current pay rates are affecting the department's ability to retain staff and, by extension, adequately respond to calls.
Not listening to your residents is frustrating for them. Not listening to people who are your public servants, who are in charge of keeping you safe, creates a danger to our community. We must do better.
At last month's annual public safety report, city officials said the police department had 17 officer vacancies, while the fire department had 9 firefighter vacancies. Sandberg also says public safety is a top priority. Griffin briefly addressed the topic of first responder shortages, but says he plans to focus on affordable housing.
And yes, people say, oh, we've got 50% students or more. But we're not focusing on the fact that we don't have people, that most people in Monroe County can't afford to live within city limits.
Prior to becoming deputy mayor, Griffin founded his own real estate agency. He says that experience and serving on the city's redevelopment commission gives him an edge over his opponents. Thompson, who served as CEO for Monroe County Habitat for Humanity for 20 years, agreed with Griffin on housing. While Sandberg felt similarly, she used the discussion on affordable housing as a bridge to economic development, another one of her priorities.
We have to have the jobs in this community that allow people to afford to live in this community. So it's hand in glove with affordable housing, affordable everything, food, shelter, transportation, a lot of things the city can influence with our policies.
In their closing thoughts, the candidates touched on political divisiveness and their desire for more civil discourse. Thompson says local politics reflect worsening divisions on a national scale, and that the mayor-elect should set a better tone. Sandberg spoke against putting labels on others when discussing policy issues. On that topic, Griffin reiterated his campaign slogan, "Believe in Bloomington," specifically, a Bloomington for all. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Lucas Gonzalez.
Primary election day is on May 2nd. There are no Republican candidates running for mayor this year. The world marked the 3-year anniversary of the COVID pandemic earlier this month. And while the number of cases has dwindled and COVID has become a regular part of life, it's still making headlines. Members of Congress are investigating the origins of the virus, and online disinformation and misinformation continue to stoke COVID deniers. Researchers at the Observatory on Social Media and IU's Luddy School of Informatics recently published their findings from a year-long study of COVID-related posts on Twitter. We're joined now by Matthew DeVerna, a PhD student in informatics who worked on the research project. Welcome to the show, Matthew. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you guys looked at around, 300 million English language tweets related to COVID vaccines. What did you find out?
Yeah, that's correct. We've been collecting Twitter data basically for the last 2 years. So looking at 2021, we found basically that there was a really high concentration of the people who were spreading this content. So on an average day, we found out that about 800 users across the entire year were responsible for spreading about 35% of the misinformation on an average day.
So, the whole COVID debate has become extremely politicized. How much of the dis or misinformation was coming from actual government officials?
That's a good question. We didn't look at that specifically in this study. That said, in the past, some of the other work that I've worked on, it looks at identifying super spreaders of misinformation in general. And we do see that there are some sort of institutional accounts, if you will, on both the left and the right, actually, that are responsible for spreading some of this content.
Mm-hmm. Social media platforms, of course, have become under fire for misinformation, disinformation. How can they evolve? How can they be better?
Yeah, it's a really tough question.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're put in a really difficult spot, right? So there's the financial incentives, and sort of the way that they do that is by thinking about optimizing for engagement. Unfortunately, optimizing for engagement is not optimizing for truth. So I think what platforms need to do is try to think about including accuracy and information quality into the optimization of their algorithms, which so far hasn't, from what we've seen, it doesn't seem to lead to a good level of engagement, so they seem to be reluctant to do that.
So overall, what can be done to curtail misinformation? What's the bottom line there?
Yeah, it's really hard. As I said, the platforms are reluctant. So individual users can think about this from their own, I guess when you're sitting at home on your phone. One thing to do is to sort of slow down a little bit. Again, because these platforms are optimized for engagement, they just want you to sort of be pressing retweet or reshare it constantly. So if you can think about slowing down and sort of, simple things like checking the sources, looking for sources on both sides of the political spectrum, these are good things that can be done. But yeah, in terms of the platforms themselves, it's really difficult. I know there's some legislation that people are thinking about for kids and all these other kind of things. So hopefully there's some movement in that area soon.
Really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Well, we're joined now by Clayton Baumgarth for headlines from around the state.
Thank you, Joe. 68 dogs and puppies were removed from a Monroe County residence late last week. What started as a basic care complaint turned into a larger issue when Animal Control, along with Bloomington Police and animal management officers from the Monroe County Sheriff's Department, discovered the residents of the house did not have proper breeding licenses.
Last week we received a complaint or concern from a member of the public. They had purchased a puppy and they were concerned about the conditions of not only that puppy but the other animals in the home.
The dogs had basics like food and water, but the care did not go beyond that. The population of dogs at the Bloomington shelter more than doubled within a day, going from 50 to over 100. Harris says some of the dogs should be adoptable starting next week. Monroe County commissioners have shared findings from tours they took of corrections facilities in Arizona with members of the committee discussing a new county jail. Commissioner Penny Githens highlighted one particular facility, a crisis response center in Prima County run by a private healthcare company.
I just felt like it was a very, very different approach and something that, again, I would like to see us move toward, because I think it does work to the care and not the cages that we all are seeking.
Funding for the center is overseen by a regional behavioral health authority, something that does not exist locally. County Judge Catherine Stafford questions whether a center like that could exist in Monroe County.
How can we take the next step in planning if we don't know if we can pay for something like this, which would be, I think, much more expensive than a jail? Not that it's not worth it, but are the dollars there?
Githens did not have direct answers to Stafford's questions, but said the county might be able to access state or federal assistance. The city hasn't signed new operating agreements with scooter companies, but proposals for a new deal from companies could be presented to City Council in the next few weeks.
We've been working really closely with Indiana University and the scooter companies to identify ways to keep people safe, number one, and then to make sure that it doesn't impinge on other transportation options.
The city previously signed $10,000 worth of operating contracts with each scooter company and received a 15-cent stipend per ride. The city is looking at ways to decrease that number as a way to address issues with parking and clutter. Indiana resident and Proud Boys member John Schaefer was one of the first to plead guilty to federal charges for the January 6, 2021 insurrection. But his lawyer filed a motion this month that the civil suit the District of Columbia has against him be dismissed. Lawyers of the District of Columbia filed a suit against Schaefer and other Proud Boys and Oath Keepers on the grounds that they conspired to attack the Capitol. The district's civil suit seeks damages from the group for the cost of the district's response to the event. The Monroe County Election Board will not compel Bloomington City Council candidate David Wolfbender, accused of running under a false address, to testify. Bender filed to run in District 6. He came under investigation after a published report citing neighbors who say he does not live at the address on his filing paperwork. Bender's name will still appear on the primary ballot in May, as the removal deadline has passed. He has a hearing scheduled for May 18th.
All right, Clayton, thank you very much. Yep. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Jumping worms are invading gardens in the state. We'll tell you preventative measures to keep the worms from getting in and spreading. And we talk with Bigfoot researchers who are on the lookout for the creature who has been encountered in Monroe County more than anywhere in the state. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
Draw your arrow to the head! We're running out of time.
Oh, God! I already feel so empowered.
We could just live happily ever after, but that would be no fun at all.
Now streaming on the PBS app, the definitive collection of documentaries from award-winning filmmaker Ken Burns.
Hemingway, the man, is much more interesting than the myth.
It is a story that Americans have to reckon with.
He's got my job, I'm the town.
Discover over 40 groundbreaking films that bring our history to life. Stream the Ken Burns collection now with Passport on the PBS app.
Life is full of choices, and right now your favorite member benefit, Passport, is offering more choices for you to stream.
Welcome to the club.
It's a beautiful thing. With cooking.
I gotta let it cook, but I keep wanting to smell it.
Travel.
And here we are.
Oh, yeah!
Documentaries.
I realized I could change the world.
And so much more. The choice is yours with Passport on the PBS Video app.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Researchers and environmental advocates want Hoosier gardeners to watch for invasive jumping worms this spring. Clayton Baumgarth reports on what makes the species so dangerous.
Jumping worms are an invasive species from Asia that are difficult to eliminate once they're established. Worms are usually good for gardens, doing things such as aerating soil and leaving behind high nutrition waste called castings.
Jumping worms don't do any of that. They stay near the surface, so they don't aerate. They have a really big mouth. For a worm, they have a big mouth, and they just shovel in all of the compost, all the leaf litter, any organic matter.
These worms, named after the dramatic writhing they do when disturbed, also create hard and dry castings, leaving nothing nutritional in the soil for future plants. Jake Hart says it's hard to tell exactly how many worms are in the state, let alone the county, thanks to a history of underreporting.
And now that we've started talking about it and asking about it, people are saying, oh, that's what this is in my garden. And so we are this year really trying to get a better handle on Monroe County.
In the winter, jumping worms die, leaving tiny millimeter-sized eggs behind. Human transport of soil and compost moves the species to markets and eventually consumers' gardens.
If you're buying a plant somewhere or compost or mulch, ask, are you aware of jumping worms? What's your source of soil? Do you use sterile soil media? Do you use or are you digging up soil and putting it in the pots?
If jumping worms are found in a garden, Jake Hart says mustard seeds and moist leaves will help repel and bait the worms. But there's one thing infested gardeners must realize.
Once you know you have them, do not ever let any soil leave your location. Don't give people potted up plants. Don't share mulch. Don't share compost. Realize that those eggs are 1 millimeter.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Clayton Baumgarth.
Gardeners who find jumping worms in their soil are encouraged to report it at eddmaps.org. We're joined now by Liz DeSantis in the newsroom for headlines from the State House. Welcome to the show, Liz.
Thanks, Joe. A Senate committee rejected an effort this week to allow anyone to vote absentee by mail in Indiana. The rejection comes as a bill to add greater voter ID requirements to vote by mail heads to the full Senate. The bill requires voters who mail in an application to vote by mail to include either their driver's license, state ID, or voting ID number. That's the same requirements for in-person voting. Democrats say the bill creates an unnecessary hurdle. Republican lawmakers passed a controversial bill out of a Senate committee Wednesday that requires teachers to notify parents if students request a name, title, or pronoun change in the classroom. Kayan Terra reports the amended legislation also addresses other issues under the banner of parents' rights.
The amended bill would require teachers to tell parents if a student requests a change in their name or pronoun, including nicknames and changes that are not related to gender expression. The bill was amended to protect teachers from being penalized if they refuse to use a child's requested name or pronoun out of religious conviction. Reverend Chad Abbott testified these provisions allow for discrimination against children who are in the LGBTQ+ community.
I believe it does not allow for human flourishing by seeking to either erase or diminish the lived experiences and stories of children whose sexuality differs in any way.
The bill maintains its restrictions on teaching human sexuality, extending the limitation from pre-kindergarten up till 3rd grade. The bill's author, Representative Michelle Davis, asserted that it is fully intended to support parental rights.
Allowing our schools to instruct our young elementary-age students in human sexuality and allowing students to decide on different identities without their parents' knowledge and consent creates an unacceptable intrusion into the parent-child relationship.
The bill now heads to the full Senate. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Kayan Tara.
House Republicans rejected an amendment to protect transgender youth from being forcibly detransitioned by the state. The current bill to ban medicinal and surgical gender-affirming care for transgender youth includes a 6-month deadline to halt puberty blockers and hormone therapy treatments. Democrats wanted an amendment to allow youth who are already receiving hormone therapies and puberty blockers to continue to receive that care.
They're thriving in school. They're thriving at work. They're able to relate to other members in their peer group.
All but 3 House Republicans present voted to defeat the amendment. Law enforcement officers get a 25-foot bubble around them that the public can't cross when told to stop. That is under a bill that's just a step away from the governor's desk. The bill is pretty straightforward. If a person comes within 25 feet of an on-duty police officer after being told to stop, they would now commit a Class C misdemeanor. That's punishable by up to 60 days in jail and a $500 fine.
We don't have the right to interfere with the police officer. We don't have the right to bump the police officer. We don't have any of those rights. But we should have the right to be with our minor child.
The bill is headed back to the House for further consideration. That's it for headlines. Joe, back to you.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. It's been 115 years since the gray wolf was eradicated in Indiana and 120 since bears last called this state home. But a small community of Hoosiers is still searching for a large, mysterious mammal they believe still roams these forests. Ethan Sandwise has more.
In winter, when the trees are bare, it's hard to imagine 7-foot-tall creatures hiding in Morgan County. But Bigfoot researchers are convinced they're here.
He just laughed at us and blew us off. But yet, when you went in their garage, they had pictures of him on their lockers.
Leroy Nail leads the Indiana Bigfoot Research Organization, whose Facebook group has over 3,000 members. He's been researching Bigfoot for 10 years.
There's a lot of people will say, let's go Bigfoot hunting. That's bad terminology because we're not hunting anything. All we're trying to do is to research and understand what might be going on.
Nail and another researcher took us to a site where they'd gathered evidence such as footprints and hair. We were looking for signs that might be attributed to Bigfoot. For most in academia, Bigfoot research exists beyond the edge of credibility. But a few scholars say those experiences need to be taken seriously.
There are instances where people are almost traumatized by what they've seen. And when we encounter something that we can't necessarily make sense of, it's something very human to want to close that gap.
Robert Dobler is a lecturer at Indiana University's Folklore Institute. What's important to him isn't whether Bigfoot can be verified. He's interested in the way Bigfoot narratives travel and how people come to terms with experiences that can be profound and terrifying.
Generally, it's an unsought encounter. People encounter something in the woods that they did not expect to see, and it's often met with terror, a lot of fear.
But members of the Bigfoot Research Organization actively seek these encounters.
I've had things thrown at me, noises all the way around me. I know that they've been around me, but I haven't had that actual visual sighting. So that's what I'm always chasing.
Many Bigfoot researchers are reluctant to share their experiences.
There's a lot at stake for somebody if you've got a nice, stable, comfortable life to come forward. So it really speaks volumes for those that do come forward. It's another kind of tick on the side of maybe they did actually experience something.
Myself, I get made fun of all the time. I have everybody that I work with that kind of laughs at me. But at the same time, a lot of those people will make fun of you in front of everybody, but then a little bit later they'll come up and go, hey, let me tell you what happened.
Nail's organization wants people to discuss the subject without fear of being judged. Nail presents his research at lectures, such as this one at the Morgan County Library. The crowd is a mix of interested adults, parents, and children.
There's a hack if you make a fist and put your elbow, put it in the footprint. If it's that long, it means it's a big footprint.
Our culture, Western culture, has been very resistant to allow anything that is experiential over evidential into our discourse.
Even for Nail, the search for evidence is secondary to what it means to be a researcher.
Because what really gets people into doing this is it's not really getting answers, because they always leave you with questions. It's always, what just happened? I can't explain what just happened.
You know, what would happen if one of these groups did find Bigfoot? What happens next? What happens to the shape of these of this subculture? What happens to these groups? Do they double down on their efforts to find more, or does it start to kind of lose interest?
I'd hate to see it. I'd hate to see that happen, because the first thing that they're going to do is someone's going to say, I'm going to have that mounted on my wall. These are part human. When people see them, they'll tell you, that was human.
Around him, yeah. He's totally mad.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Ethan Sandweiss.
Well, March Madness took an unexpected turn this week for Indiana's men's and women's basketball teams. The top-seeded Hoosier women and the fourth-seeded men both lost in the second round of the NCAA tournaments. It was especially disappointing for the women who had their best season in program history and entered the tournament with title aspirations.
It hurts right now, but it should. I mean, we work hard, and winning is hard. And those kids are upset. They're emotional right now. You know, their plans were, to win a national championship.
That's the end of this program. Our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.